A rude gym trainer mocks an older man at the heavy bag, calling him grandpa and suggesting he try the senior center instead. The arrogant trainer makes cruel jokes about the quiet stranger's speech, pushing him away from the equipment while his buddies film and laugh. But this isn't just some random old-timer trying to relive his glory days. This is Mike Tyson himself. The trainer has no idea he just humiliated the most feared heavyweight champion in boxing history, a man who once terrorized the ring with lightning-fast combinations that could end careers in seconds. While the bully continues his verbal assault, demanding the old man find somewhere else to play pretend, Iron Mike calmly approaches the heavy bag. The gym falls silent as Tyson unleashes a combination so devastating it nearly tears the bag from its chain, each punch echoing like gunshots. Through the stunned facility, the trainer's cocky smirk melts into pure terror as recognition floods his face. He's just mocked a legend who's destroyed bigger, stronger men with surgical precision. What happens when you disrespect the baddest man on the planet? Will the trainer survive learning why some champions never truly retire? What happened next would haunt the bully's nightmares for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mike Tyson stepped out of his modest Honda Civic and paused on the cracked sidewalk, reading the faded sign above the entrance. Riverside Community Gym, EST 1987. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Newark street as a steady stream of people entered and left the building. Young fighters with gym bags slung over their shoulders walked past elderly folks in comfortable sneakers, creating the kind of mix you didn't see in fancy health clubs. The smell hit him first when he pushed through the glass doors. Leather, sweat, and that indefinable scent of hard work that no amount of cleaning could ever quite eliminate. It reminded him of Cuz D'Amato's place up in Catskill, where legends were born in rooms that looked nothing like the chrome and mirror palaces that had taken over the fitness world. $15 for the day, said the teenage girl behind the reception desk, barely looking up from her phone. She had no idea who was standing in front of her, and Mike preferred it that way. He handed over a 20 and told her to keep the change, then took a moment to absorb the authentic atmosphere. The rhythmic percussion of speed bags provided a steady beat, while someone worked combinations on the heavy bags across the room. To his left, a 67-year-old man with silver hair and perfect form threw crisp jabs at a worn leather bag, each punch landing with the precision that only came from decades of practice. Near the free weights, a young mother was teaching her 8-year-old daughter basic punches, both of them giggling as the little girl tried to copy her mom's stance. The girl's face was serious with concentration, and her mom's patient encouragement reminded Mike why he'd always loved these neighborhood gyms. This was where real people came to better themselves, not to see and be seen. In the locker room, Mike changed into simple workout clothes while listening to conversations about neighborhood problems, family struggles, and weekend plans. These weren't professional athletes or trust fund fitness enthusiasts. These were working people trying to stay strong, stay healthy, and maybe teach their kids something about discipline and respect. He emerged from the locker room moving quietly, observing more than participating. When an elderly woman struggled with adjusting a machine's weight settings, he stepped over without being asked and helped her find the right position. She thanked him with a warm smile, and he nodded respectfully before moving on. The heavy bag section called to him, but as he approached, a harsh voice cut through the gym's ambient noise like a blade. Someone was shouting, and the tone carried the unmistakable edge of cruelty disguised as instruction. The source of the commotion became clear as Mike got closer to the heavy bag area. Brad Kellerman stood 6'2" with sleeve tattoos of skulls and snakes covering both arms, his muscled frame draped in a tight black t-shirt that showed off every line of his physique. He was circling a nervous 16-year-old like a predator, his voice dripping with disdain. "Pathetic," Brad shouted at Danny Morales, who stood with gloves on but shoulders hunched defensively. "You call that a jab? My grandmother hits harder than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. Danny flinched at the volume, his naturally expressive brown eyes showing more fear than determination. The kid clearly had talent. Mike could see it in his stance and the way he moved, but Brad's approach was designed to tear down rather than build up. "You think this is some kind of game?" Brad continued, his buzz-cut head gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "You think showing up here makes you a fighter? You're wasting my time and everyone else's." Other gym members had started avoiding the area, their discomfort obvious as they grabbed their gear and moved to different sections. Even the elderly man Mike had noticed earlier, Walter, glanced over with concern before focusing intently on his own workout. When Danny missed a combination Brad had demonstrated, the trainer's response was swift and humiliating. "Drop and give. Me 20. Right now." Danny got down and started doing push-ups, but that wasn't enough for Brad. The trainer stepped forward and placed one foot on Danny's back, adding his weight to make the exercise nearly impossible. "This is what happens when you don't listen," Brad announced loudly enough for half the gym to hear. "Maybe this will help you remember that I'm not here to coddle you." Mike watched the scene unfold, his jaw tightening slightly as he recognized the classic behavior of someone who used their position to dominate rather than develop. He'd seen it before, trainers who got off on the power dynamic, who built their own confidence by destroying someone else's. Sal Torino, the 70-year-old gym owner, stood near his office door watching with obvious concern. His weathered face showed the conflict of a man who wanted to intervene but seemed powerless to stop what was happening. The old Golden Gloves boxer's hands opened and closed at his sides, decades of fighting instinct warring with the practical reality of running a business in a tough neighborhood. Mike approached casually, his voice calm and respectful. "Excuse me, could I use the bag next to you when you're done?" Brad looked him up and down dismissively, taking in the plain hoodie and worn sneakers. A slow smirk spread across his face as he sized up what appeared to be just another middle-aged guy trying to relive his youth. "Rush hour at the senior center, huh?" Mike kept his expression neutral, his hands loose at his sides. "I just want to work the bag for a few minutes. Not looking for any trouble." But Brad was just getting started. The trainer stepped closer, his voice getting louder and more aggressive with each word. "Oh, this is rich. Let me guess. You used to box back in high school, right? Think you still got it." A few young guys working the speed bag started to chuckle, drawn in by Brad's performance. They didn't know any better, Mike realized. To them, this was just their trainer having some fun with an older guy who didn't know when to quit. "Tell you what, old-timer," Brad continued, making exaggerated gestures that got more laughs from his audience. "Maybe you should try the library. Instead, they got quiet activities there. More your speed." The trainer began mimicking Mike's slight lisp, drawing out certain sounds and getting bigger laughs from the young men who thought they were watching harmless fun. "Or maybe the senior center down the street. I hear they got bingo on Tuesdays." Danny's face showed mortification as he watched the scene unfold. The kid was still on the ground from his punishment push-ups, but Mike could see him trying to catch Brad's attention, sensing something dangerous in the older man's stillness that the trainer was too arrogant to notice. Other gym members had stopped their workouts entirely now, some pulling out phones to record what they assumed would be another humiliation for social media. The atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable to anticipatory, like the moment before. "A storm breaks. I mean, can you even reach the top of that bag?" Brad asked, gesturing at the heavy bag with theatrical concern. "Wouldn't want you to break a hip trying to throw that big right hand. Medicare probably doesn't cover stupid." The crude joke earned the biggest laugh yet from Brad's admirers, but Mike noticed that the more experienced gym members, Walter, Sal, and a few others, had gone completely quiet. They weren't laughing. They were watching. Mike's breathing had become more controlled, deeper, and more measured. His hands remained unclenched, but something in his posture had subtly shifted. The casual observer might miss it, but anyone who knew boxing would recognize the signs of a man preparing for action. "Look," Mike said quietly, his voice still calm despite the mockery. "I understand this is your area. I'll just wait until—" "Wait," Brad interrupted, his arrogance reaching its peak. "Oh no, Grandpa. You don't get to wait. This area is for serious fighters only. You know what that means." The trainer reached out and placed his hand firmly on Mike's chest, pushing him back a step while staring directly into his eyes. "It means you need to find somewhere else to play pretend." Mike looked down at Brad's hand pressed against his chest for a long moment, then slowly raised his eyes to meet the trainer's confident stare. Something in that gaze made Brad's smirk falter for just an instant, a flicker of uncertainty that passed so quickly he convinced himself he'd imagined it. With deliberate calm, Mike reached up and gently, but firmly removed Brad's hand from his chest. His touch was respectful but unmistakably strong, and Brad felt the surprising power in those fingers. "Could I just hit the bag once?" Mike asked quietly. "Show the kid proper form?" The request was so humble, so seemingly harmless, that Brad's arrogance surged back full force. Here was his chance to really humiliate this old-timer in front of everyone, to show what happened when people didn't know their place. "Oh, absolutely," Brad announced loudly, stepping back with an exaggerated bow. "Everyone gather round. Watch. Grandpa show us how it's done back in the Stone Age." The small crowd pressed closer, phones raised and ready to capture what they expected to be an embarrassing display. Danny tried one more time to catch Brad's eye, to somehow signal that this was a mistake, but the trainer was too caught up in his performance. Mike approached the heavy bag with quiet dignity, ignoring the snickers and comments from the audience. He took a traditional boxing stance, his feet positioning themselves with the muscle memory of decades. His hands came up in a guard that would have looked textbook perfect to anyone who knew the sweet science. For a moment, everything was still. Mike's breathing steadied, his focus narrowed, and something fundamental shifted in his bearing. The casual, unassuming man in the hoodie disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. When he moved, it was with the fluid precision of a master craftsman. The combination came in a blur: jab, cross, left hook, each punch thrown with surgical accuracy and devastating power. The impact sounded like gunshots echoing through the gym, leather on leather with the distinctive crack that only came from perfect technique meeting tremendous force. The heavy bag, which had absorbed thousands of punches from dozens of fighters, bucked and swayed wildly. The chain holding it groaned under the stress, and for a moment it seemed like the whole apparatus might tear free from its mounting. The gym fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped, every machine went quiet, every phone dropped to someone's side. The only sound was the heavy bag still swinging, its chain creaking ominously overhead. Brad's face had gone from confident red to pale white in the space of those 3 punches. His mouth hung open as recognition began to dawn, as the impossible reality of what he'd just witnessed started to penetrate his shocked brain. From across the gym came the sound of footsteps, and Sal Torino emerged from his office, drawn by the unmistakable sound of professional-level power hitting the bags. Sal Torino approached slowly, his experienced eye taking in every detail of what he'd just witnessed. The old gym owner had heard that distinctive sound only a handful of times in his 40 years of training fighters. The crack of leather meeting leather with the kind of power that separated professionals from pretenders. "Holy Christ," Sal's voice carried across the now silent gym. "Mike Tyson." The name hit the crowd like an electric shock. Phones that had been lowered in stunned silence shot back up as people realized they weren't just watching some random old guy. They were in the presence of a legend. "No way," someone whispered. "Iron Mike? Here. Oh my God, it really is him." The gym erupted into controlled chaos as members approached respectfully, asking for photos and autographs. Mike was gracious with everyone, taking time to sign worn boxing gloves and offer brief, encouraging words to the young fighters who'd gathered around him. "Keep your hands up," he told a teenage girl who'd been working the speed bag. "Power comes from your legs, not just your arms." To an older man struggling with his form, "You've got good instincts. Trust them." Brad Kellerman stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions as the full weight of his humiliation sank in. When he finally found his voice, desperation made him loud. "I knew it," he announced to anyone who would listen. "I mean, I had a feeling. You can always tell, right?" The way he moved, the stance, dead giveaway. But nobody was buying it. The damage to his credibility was complete, and the looks he received ranged from embarrassed to disgusted. A few people actually turned away when he tried to approach Mike, wanting nothing to do with the trainer who'd just made a fool of himself. Danny approached Mike with stars in his eyes, his earlier fear replaced by pure amazement. Mike spent several minutes with the kid, showing him proper footwork and explaining how to generate power from the ground up. "Boxing isn't about hurting people," Mike said quietly, adjusting Danny's stance. "It's about discipline, respect, and protecting yourself and others. Remember that." Sal shared stories of watching Mike's career, his weathered hands gesturing excitedly as he recalled legendary fights. The old trainer's respect was genuine and deep, and Mike found himself enjoying the conversation with someone who truly understood the sport. After 20 minutes of photos and boxing talk, Mike began gathering his things. He'd made his point about respect, delivered a lesson in humility, and connected with some good people. Time to go home. But as he headed toward the exit, Danny appeared at his elbow, glancing nervously around the gym to make sure Brad wasn't watching. "Mr. Tyson," the kid whispered urgently, "I need to tell you something. It's about what really goes on here." Danny pulled Mike aside near the gym's exit, his hands trembling as he spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Every few seconds, his eyes darted toward Brad, who was still trying to salvage his reputation with anyone who would listen. "There's stuff happening here that you don't know about," Danny began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brad and two other trainers, Rick Santoro and Tommy Volpe, they recruit guys like me for underground fights." Mike's expression remained neutral, but his full attention was now focused on the frightened teenager. "They promise easy money," Danny continued, pulling out his phone. "$500, sometimes $1,000 for one fight. When you're trying to help your grandmother pay rent, that sounds like salvation." The photos Danny showed Mike told a different story. Image after image of teenagers with blackened eyes, broken noses, split lips, and worse. Danny scrolled to a picture of himself from 2 weeks ago, his face swollen beyond recognition, dried blood crusting around his nose and mouth. "This is what the fights really look like," Danny explained. "No gloves, no rules, no safety equipment. They put kids against grown men, and the crowd wants blood." Mike studied each photo, his jaw tightening as he recognized the systematic abuse these kids were enduring. One image showed a boy who couldn't have been older than 15, unconscious on a concrete floor, while men in expensive suits counted money in the background. "Once you're in, they control you," Danny said, his voice growing even quieter. "They say you owe them money for training, for equipment, for management fees. I owe $3,000 now, and every time I fight, somehow I owe more instead of less." The teenager showed Mike a photo of his grandmother, Rosa Morales, a strong-looking woman in her 60s. "They know where we live. They know my grandmother raised me after my parents died. They made it clear what happens if I try to quit or talk to anyone." "What about Sal?" Mike asked. "He's tried to stop it, but what can he do? He's 70 years old, and these guys have connections everywhere. Police, city officials, they own people." Danny's phone buzzed with a text message that made his face go pale. "There's a fight tomorrow night. 2 16-year-olds against guys who've been to prison. The crowd bets on how long the kids will last before they get knocked out." "Where?" Mike asked. "A nightclub called The Knockout. It's run by Vincent Marconi. Everyone calls him Vinny. He's the one who really controls all this." Danny started to say something else, but his words died in his throat. Mike followed his gaze and saw 3 large men entering the gym, their eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Danny. The lead man, thick-necked with hands like sledgehammers, smiled without warmth as he headed directly toward them. His 2 companions flanked him with the practiced ease of men who'd done this many times before. "Shit," Danny whispered. "That's Leo Mancuso. He collects for Vinny." Leo Mancuso approached with the casual confidence of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with his fists. His companions, Big Eddie Torino and Joey Castellano, spread out slightly to block any escape routes, a maneuver they'd clearly practiced. "Danny boy," Leo said, his voice carrying false friendliness. "Hope you're ready for tomorrow night. Big fight coming up." Leo carried a gym bag that clanked ominously when he set it down. Danny's eyes fixed on the bag with obvious fear. "I told you guys, I'm still hurt from last time," Danny said, touching his ribs gingerly. "Doctor said I need at least another week before." "Doctor?" Leo laughed, cutting him off. "Kid, the only medical opinion that matters is whether you can still walk into the ring. And look at you, standing up just fine." Mike stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority. "I'm Mike Tyson. Maybe we can work something out here." The 3 thugs exchanged glances before Leo burst into genuine laughter. "Mike Tyson? No shit. Well. This is interesting." Instead of the respect or fear Mike's name usually commanded, Leo seemed genuinely amused. "You know what, champ? Vinny's been expecting this. Said you had a history of sticking your nose where it don't belong, trying to save every troubled kid you meet." Big Eddie pulled out his phone and took a picture of Mike. Boss is gonna love this. Here's the message, Leo continued, stepping closer to Mike without a trace of intimidation. Mind your own business, or join the kids in the ring. Your choice. Joey opened the gym bag, revealing baseball bats, brass knuckles, and other instruments. Designed to cause pain. Tomorrow night's main event just got more interesting. Danny here's fighting Karl Kozlov Jr. That's Karl the Butcher Kozlov's boy. Kid's 22 and already put 3 fighters in the hospital. Danny's face went white. You said it would be someone my age. You promised. I promised you'd make money, Leo interrupted. Never said it would be easy money. The thug turned back to Mike with mock respect. Tell you what, legend. You want to help the kid? Show up tomorrow night. The knockout, 10 p.m. Bring your gloves. What about his grandmother? Mike asked, remembering what Danny had told him about Rosa. Leo's smile turned cold. What about her? Nice old lady. Lives. At 47 Maple Street, right? Takes the bus to church every Sunday morning. Real creature of habit. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Danny's hands clenched into fists, but Leo just laughed. Easy, tough guy. Save it for tomorrow night. You're gonna need all the fight you got left. The 3 men headed for the exit, but Leo turned back one more time. Oh, and Danny, don't even think about running. We know where to find you. And your grandmother. And anyone else you care about. As the gym door swung shut behind them, Danny slumped against the wall like his strings had been cut. Mike watched the door for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. They're not collecting you tomorrow, he said quietly. I'm going to stop this fight. Mike walked with Danny toward the parking lot, their conversation continuing in urgent whispers. The teenager's beaten-up Honda Civic sat alone in the far corner, its faded paint and dented bumper telling the story of a family struggling to make ends meet. You don't understand, Danny said, his voice tight with fear. Vinny's got people everywhere. Cops, judges, city council members. He's been running this operation for years. Mike listened while scanning the parking lot, his instincts telling him something was wrong. Too quiet, too empty for this time of evening. Danny tried to start his car, but the engine just wheezed and clicked without turning over. He tried again with the same result, then slammed his palm against the steering wheel in frustration. I can give you a ride, Mike offered. Thanks, but I don't want to drag you into this any deeper. These aren't the kind of people who forget or forgive. As they walked toward Mike's Honda, 3 figures emerged from behind a delivery truck parked near the street. Leo Mancuso and his crew had been waiting. Change of plans, Danny, Leo called out, pulling baseball bats from behind his back. Big Eddie and Joey flanked him, their weapons gleaming under the parking lot lights. Vinny wants to send a message about what happens to people who ask too. Many questions, Leo explained, approaching slowly. You can watch, champ, or you can join in. Your choice. They went for Danny first, Leo swinging his bat in a vicious arc aimed at the teenager's ribs. That was their mistake. Mike moved with the same fluid precision he'd shown at the heavy bag, but now the target was human. His first punch caught Leo in the solar plexus, folding the big man in half and sending his bat clattering across the asphalt. Before Big Eddie could react, Mike's left hook connected with his jaw, dropping him like a stone. Joey tried to circle around, swinging his bat wildly, but Mike stepped inside his reach and delivered an uppercut that lifted the thug off his feet. All 3 men were down in less than 15 seconds, groaning and clutching various parts of their anatomy. Mike had used just enough force to disable, without causing permanent damage, precise, controlled violence that spoke of decades of experience. But the sound of sirens was already approaching. Neighbors in the surrounding apartments had called 911, and 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot with lights flashing. Officers Martinez and Collins stepped out, their hands resting on their weapons as they surveyed the scene. Mike expected them to arrest the men who'd come armed with baseball bats, but instead they walked directly to him. Hands behind your back, Martinez ordered, pulling out handcuffs. What about them? Mike asked, nodding toward the 3 thugs, who were slowly picking themselves up off the ground. They're the victims here, Collins said without even looking at the weapons scattered around the parking lot. Says so in their statement. Leo, despite his obvious injuries, managed a pained smile. Crazy old man just attacked us for no reason, officers. We were just talking to the kid when this psycho went nuts. As the handcuffs clicked shut around Mike's wrists, a black Cadillac pulled into the parking lot. The engine purred with expensive precision as Vinny Marconi stepped out, adjusting his gold chains and smoothing his perfectly tailored suit. Well, Vinny said, approaching with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. The great Mike Tyson. In handcuffs. In my neighborhood. He stopped directly in front of Mike, close enough that the scent of his cologne mixed with cigar smoke was overwhelming. Let me explain something to you, has been. This is my town, my rules. Some legends need to learn when their time is over. The Newark City Jail released Mike Tyson at 6 in the morning, the early sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Sal Torino was waiting by the curb in his old Ford pickup, the $5,000 bail money having come from the gym owner's life savings. Bastards kept you all night for defending yourself, Sal muttered as Mike climbed into the passenger seat. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with anger. Where are we going? Mike asked. To meet someone who can tell you what we're really up against. Sal drove through the waking neighborhood to Rosie's Diner, a small place with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of bacon grease that had been there since the Carter administration. In a corner booth sat Rosa Morales, Danny's grandmother, with boxes of papers spread across the table. T64. Rosa had the sturdy build of someone who'd worked hard her whole life, but her dark eyes burned with intelligence and determination. She stood to shake Mike's hand, her grip firm and calloused. Mr. Tyson, thank you for trying to help my grandson. But you need to understand what you've walked into. Rosa spread out photographs, documents, and handwritten notes across the table. The evidence painted a picture of systematic exploitation that made Mike's stomach turn. Vinny Marconi runs more than just underground fights, she explained. He's got loan sharking, drug dealing, gambling, and human trafficking all operating out of that nightclub. The fights are just the most visible part. She showed Mike photos of Kevin Murphy, a 17-year-old who'd suffered permanent brain damage after a fight last month. Another picture showed Antonio Rivera, 16, who died from internal bleeding after being matched against a 200-pound ex-convict. The police won't help because half of them are on his payroll, Rosa continued. City council members, judges, even FBI agents. Vinny's got something on all of them or pays them enough to look the other way. Mike studied a photograph of the Knockout nightclub, a converted warehouse with blacked-out windows. How many kids is he controlling? At least 30 that I know of, probably more. Boys and girls between 14 and 18. He finds them when they're desperate, families behind on rent, medical bills, kids who've aged out of foster care. Promises them easy money, then traps them in debt cycles that never end. Rosa's voice grew quiet as she showed Mike the most disturbing evidence. Photos of kids barely conscious, blood streaming down their faces while well-dressed men counted money in the background. I've been documenting everything for 8 months, she said. But what good does evidence do when the people who should investigate are part of the problem? Sal leaned forward. That's why we need someone like you. Someone they can't buy or intimidate. There's a fight tonight, Rosa added, her voice heavy with dread. Danny's supposed to face Carl Kozlov Jr. They're calling it a punishment fight, designed to seriously hurt him for talking to you. Mike's hands slowly formed fists on the table. At 8 o'clock that evening, Mike and Sal sat in the old Ford pickup across the street from the Knockout nightclub. The converted warehouse looked like a fortress with blacked-out windows and 2 hulking security guards checking everyone who approached. They watched expensive cars drop off well-dressed gamblers at the main entrance, while a separate side door admitted a steady stream of teenagers and young men. The contrast was stark, silk ties and gold watches going in the front, desperation and fear entering through the side. There's Marcus Johnson, Sal said, pointing to a 17-year-old Mike recognized from the gym. The kid's face was still, bruised from his last fight, but he walked with the resigned shuffle of someone who had no choice. Luis Vasquez followed, 16 years old, and trying to look tough despite the fear obvious in his posture. Mike had watched both boys train at Riverside and seen their natural talent being corrupted by Brad's toxic approach. They paid $50 each to a thick-necked man at the side entrance who searched everyone for weapons and recording devices. Rick Santoro, one of the trainers Rosa had mentioned, was collecting money and directing traffic with the efficiency of long practice. Inside, the basement had been transformed into a grotesque arena. Makeshift bleachers surrounded a bare concrete floor marked with spray-painted lines to indicate the fighting area. No ropes, no padding, no safety equipment of any kind. The crowd was a mixture of wealthy degenerates and working-class gamblers, all united by their thirst for violence. They screamed for blood while children destroyed each other for their entertainment. Mike watched in horrified fascination as a 15-year-old faced off against a 25-year-old ex-convict covered in prison tattoos. The boy tried to use proper boxing technique, but his opponent fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who'd learned violence as survival. Blood streamed down the teenager's face as the crowd roared approval. No referee stepped in to stop the carnage. No corner man threw in a towel to save the kid from further punishment. Vincent Marconi sat ringside in a throne-like chair, resplendent in a white suit and gold chains. He orchestrated the betting with the casual authority of a man who owned everything he surveyed, taking percentages and collecting debts with equal efficiency. The boy finally collapsed, his unconscious body crumpling to the concrete while the crowd cheered and money changed hands. Two men dragged him away like garbage, and Marconi checked his gold Rolex with bored satisfaction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brad Kellerman's voice boomed over the sound system as he entered the makeshift ring. His earlier humiliation at the gym seemed forgotten as he played master of ceremonies for this human cockfight. Time for tonight's main event. In the red corner, weighing 145 pounds, Danny the Kid Morales. Danny was pushed toward the ring by armed guards, his face pale but set with grim determination. The crowd sensed fresh meat and began placing bets on how long he would last. And in the blue corner, weighing 190 pounds, undefeated in underground competition, Karl Kozlov Jr. Kozlov entered the ring showing off scars from previous fights, his massive frame making Danny look like a child. The 22-year-old had his father's dead eyes and his grandfather's reputation for brutality. Mike was already moving toward the ring when the opening bell rang. Mike pushed through the bloodthirsty crowd with focused determination, his eyes locked on the ring where Danny was about to face impossible odds. The teenager stood in one corner, hands taped but no gloves, facing Karl Kozlov Jr.'s intimidating bulk. "Stop the fight," Mike shouted, vaulting over the low barrier that separated the audience from the combat area. The crowd erupted in confusion and excitement as they recognized the legendary heavyweight champion. Phones appeared everywhere, capturing the moment. Iron Mike Tyson crashed their underground blood sport. "If you want to see a real fight," Mike announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet basement, "put someone in the ring who can actually defend himself." Vinny Marconi rose from his throne, his initial shock quickly replaced by calculating greed. Having Mike Tyson appear in his ring was an opportunity too valuable to waste. "The great Mike Tyson wants to play," Vinny called out. "How can I refuse? But let's make it interesting." The crime boss stepped into the ring with his microphone, working the crowd like a carnival barker. "If the legend wins, the kid goes free. But if he loses, Danny fights next week against an even bigger opponent." Mike nodded grimly. It was a trap, but Danny's safety was worth the risk. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness history," Vinny announced. "Iron Mike Tyson versus Karl the Crusher Kozlov Jr." The crowd went wild, phone cameras recording every angle as Mike stripped off his hoodie and took his stance. At 57, he didn't look like the intimidating force who'd terrorized heavyweight boxing in the 80s, but his posture and movement carried decades of muscle memory. Kozlov Jr. rushed across the ring like an angry bull, throwing wild haymakers designed to end the fight quickly. He was strong, young, and vicious, but he fought with the undisciplined fury of someone who'd never faced real competition. Mike slipped the first punch by inches, his head movement still sharp despite his age. The second punch missed by even less, but Mike was studying his opponent's patterns, looking for openings. When Kozlov Jr. overcommitted on a massive right hand, Mike stepped inside and delivered a textbook left hook to the body. The sound of leather meeting flesh echoed through the basement like a gunshot, and the younger man's confident expression flickered with the first hint of doubt. Mike followed with a lightning-fast combination: jab, cross, uppercut, each punch thrown with surgical precision. Kozlov Jr. staggered backward, blood streaming from his nose as the crowd fell silent. The fight lasted 90 seconds. Mike's final combination was a thing of beauty, a feint with the left hand that dropped Kozlov Jr.'s guard, followed by a right cross that sent the bigger man crashing to the concrete. He didn't get up. The basement erupted in chaos as the crowd realized they'd just witnessed a masterclass in professional boxing. Mike stood over his unconscious opponent, breathing hard but victorious. Vinny approached with a wide smile, publicly congratulating Mike, while his eyes promised future retribution. Magnificent. Simply magnificent. The legend lives. But as Mike left with Danny and Sal, he caught Vinny's whispered words to Fat Tony Benedetto. Make some calls. This ain't over. The battle was won, but the war was just beginning. The next morning, Mike sat across from Agent Patricia Mills in a coffee shop near the FBI's Newark field office. At 42, Mills had the sharp features and athletic build of someone who'd earned her position through competence rather than politics. Her professional demeanor radiated confidence as she spread case files across the table. We've been investigating Marconi's operation for 6 months, Mills explained, her pen moving efficiently across a legal pad. What you did last night was incredibly brave, but it also made you a target. Mike sipped his coffee and listened as Mills outlined the federal case they were building. Racketeering, human trafficking, assault, conspiracy. The charges would put Vinny away for life if they could make them stick. The problem is witnesses, Mills continued. These kids are too scared to testify, and the adults are either bought off or intimidated into silence. We need someone with credibility to go undercover and gather evidence. She handed Mike a small recording device disguised as a phone charger. If you're willing to help, this could record everything we need to shut down the operation permanently. Mike pocketed the device without hesitation. What do you need me to do? Keep doing what you're doing. Show up at the fights, document the abuse, identify the players. But be careful, Marconi's people will be watching you now. After the meeting, Mike drove across town to East Side Boxing Club, a smaller gym where he'd arranged to train Danny and the other kids away from Brad's toxic influence. The place was cleaner than Riverside, with newer equipment and better lighting. Danny was already there with Marcus Johnson and Luis Vasquez, the 3 teenagers looking like they'd found sanctuary. Mike spent 2 hours teaching them proper technique, emphasizing defense and discipline over aggression. Boxing isn't about hurting people, Mike told them, adjusting Danny's stance. It's about protecting yourself and others. Real strength comes from knowing when not to fight. He used his own money to pay off Marcus and Luis's debts to Vinny's organization, $6,000 that bought their freedom from the underground fighting circuit. The relief on their faces was worth every penny. That evening, Mike successfully recorded evidence at a smaller underground fight in a warehouse across town. The hidden device captured Vinny's lieutenants discussing their operation, naming corrupt officials, and detailing their methods of recruiting vulnerable kids. Walking back to his car afterward, Mike felt optimistic for the first time since this whole mess began. Agent Mills seemed competent and trustworthy. The evidence was mounting, and 3 kids were already free from Vinny's control. His phone rang as he reached the Honda. Rosa Morales' voice was tight with panic. Mike, you need to get to the hospital right away. It's Sal. He's had a heart attack. The optimism drained out of him like water from a broken glass. This was just the beginning of Vinny's retaliation, and innocent people were already paying the price for Mike's interference. He drove through the night toward Newark University Hospital, knowing that the stakes had just gotten much higher. Chapter 13. Mike rushed through the sterile corridors of Newark University Hospital, following the signs to the intensive care unit. The antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting reminded him of too many visits to similar places throughout his turbulent life. He found Rosa Morales sitting beside Sal's bed, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The old gym owner lay connected to a maze of machines, his face pale and drawn beneath the oxygen mask. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking the fragile rhythm of a heart that had endured too much stress. What happened? Mike asked quietly, taking the chair beside Rosa. They came after closing time, she whispered, her voice thick with anger and grief. Brad Kellerman and 5 of Vinny's men. They wanted to know where you were training the kids. You helped escape. Dr. Sarah Chun, a young cardiologist with kind eyes, approached with Sal's chart. Mr. Torino suffered a massive heart attack, likely triggered by severe stress and physical trauma. His condition is stable for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. Rosa's hands shook as she described the attack. Sal refused to tell them anything. Said it wasn't right what they were doing to those kids. So they beat him with baseball bats and crowbars. The damage to Riverside Community Gym was devastating. Every piece of equipment had been destroyed, heavy bags slashed open, mirrors shattered. Even the old photographs of legendary fighters torn down and burned. 40 years of building a community gathering place destroyed in one night of vindictive rage. The insurance won't cover even half of it, Rosa continued. Sal put everything he had into that place. It was his life's work. Mike studied Sal's unconscious form, noting the bruises on his arms where the attackers had struck him. The old man's hands, which had wrapped thousands of fighters' hands over the decades, were bandaged and swollen that a nurse approached with visiting. Hour restrictions, but Mike wasn't ready to leave. He pulled his chair closer to Sal's bedside and spoke quietly to the unconscious gym owner. "I'm sorry this happened to you, old man. You were just trying to help kids, and they punished you for it. That's not right." Sal's eyes fluttered open briefly, focusing with effort on Mike's face. His lips moved beneath the oxygen mask, and Mike leaned closer to hear the whispered words. "Save the kids, even if you have to. Cross lines the law won't let you cross." The old fighter's eyes closed again, but his message was clear. The legal system had failed these children, and someone needed to step outside its boundaries to protect them. Mike stood slowly, his decision crystallizing as he looked at the man who'd been hurt for simply caring about neighborhood kids. The respectful, patient approach wasn't working. It was time to take the fight directly to Vinnie Marconi. Rosa saw the change in his expression and nodded grimly. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever it takes," Mike replied, walking toward the elevator with newfound purpose. The gloves were coming off. Chapter 14. Mike met Rosa and Danny at midnight in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Newark. The kind of place where honest conversations could happen without electronic surveillance or unexpected visitors. Danny's grandmother had insisted on being part of whatever came next, and Mike respected her too much to argue. "We're done playing by their rules," Mike announced, spreading a hand-drawn map of Vinny's operation across a dusty table. "They want a war? Let's give them one." Using his extensive boxing connections and hard-earned street knowledge, Mike began systematically targeting Vinny's infrastructure. His first move was exposing Officer Collins, the corrupt cop who'd arrested him in the parking lot. Mike had Danny call Collins claiming to have information about a drug dealer, then recorded the conversation where Collins demanded a $500 bribe to lose the tip. The recording went directly to Internal Affairs and local news stations simultaneously. At BY Morning, Collins was suspended pending investigation, and the story was leading the local news cycle. One corrupt piece of Vinny's protection network was gone. Next came City Councilman Harold Brennan, who'd been providing political cover for the Knockouts operating licenses. Mike's research revealed that Brennan owed Vinny $60,000 in gambling debts, making him vulnerable to pressure. A simple phone call changed everything. Mike identified himself and calmly explained that he knew about the debt and the favors. Brennan could either withdraw his support for Vinny's business interests or find his gambling problem splashed across every newspaper in New Jersey. Brennan chose self-preservation over corruption. Mike also began appearing at underground fights, not to compete, but to protect young fighters when matches became too dangerous. His mere presence forced more humane treatment. Even Vinny's thugs were reluctant to allow children to be beaten to death in front of Iron Mike Tyson. He documented everything with Agent Mills' hidden cameras, building a comprehensive record of the operation's scope and brutality. 3 more young fighters were freed from their debt contracts using Mike's money, and word began spreading through the community that someone was finally fighting back. Within a week, Vinny's weekly income had dropped by almost 40%. The criminal organization was bleeding money and credibility, while legitimate authorities circled like sharks sensing blood in the water. Mike visited Sal every day, updating the unconscious gym owner on their progress. The old fighter remained stable, but hadn't regained consciousness since that first brief moment of clarity. "We're winning, old man," Mike whispered during one visit. "The kids are getting free, and the bad guys are running scared." But even as he spoke the words, Mike felt a nagging unease. Vinnie Marconi wasn't the type to simply absorb losses and retreat. The crime boss would be planning something, and when cornered animals fought back, They fought with desperate fury. Mike's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Mills, ready to move on arrests. Meet me tomorrow morning. Justice is finally coming. For the first time in weeks, Mike allowed himself to feel optimistic about the outcome. Chapter 15. Agent Mills spread arrest warrants and case files across the coffee shop table with the confidence of someone about to close the biggest case of her career. Her sharp eyes gleamed with anticipation as she outlined the coordinated federal operation plan for the following morning. We have enough evidence to charge Marconi with racketeering, human trafficking, assault, and murder in Antonio Rivera's death, Mills explained, her pen moving efficiently across legal documents. The recordings you gathered were perfect, clear, audio of him ordering violence against minors. Mike studied the warrants, seeing Vinny's name alongside those of his top lieutenants. Fat Tony Benedetto, Rick Santoro, Tommy Volpe, and a dozen others. The scope of the operation was impressive, with simultaneous raids planned for the Knockout, Vinny's mansion, and several safe houses across Newark. What about the corrupt officials? Mike asked. Councilman Brennan has already agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Officer Collins will testify about the broader police corruption in return for reduced charges. We're dismantling the entire network. Mills showed Mike photographs of the tactical teams being assembled, the warrant execution scheduled for dawn to catch the targets off guard. Federal agents, honest local cops, and state police would coordinate the largest organized crime bust in Newark's recent history. Your efforts freed 8 young fighters from the organization, Mills continued. Danny, Marcus, Luis, and 5 others are all safe and willing to testify. Sal's condition has improved. Doctors say he'll make a full recovery. The news about Sal lifted Mike's spirits considerably. The old gym owner had regained consciousness the day before and was already talking about rebuilding Riverside Community Gym with better equipment and stronger community programs. This feels too good to be true, Mike admitted, but Mills' confident smile was reassuring. Sometimes the good guys actually win, she replied. Your willingness to step outside normal procedures gave us the evidence we needed to make the case stick. Justice through proper legal channels. It's exactly what this community needs. Mike called Rosa from the parking lot to share the good news. Danny's grandmother wept with relief when she heard that Vinny would be behind bars within 24 hours, the nightmare finally ending through legitimate law enforcement action. That evening, Mike visited Sal at the hospital, finding the old trainer sitting up in bed and complaining about the food. His color had returned, and the machines monitoring his vital signs showed steady improvement. Heard we won, Sal said with a weak smile. FBI's moving tomorrow morning. Looks like your faith in the system was justified after all, Mike replied, genuinely happy to see his friend recovering. They talked about plans for the new gym, the scholarship fund Mike wanted to establish for at-risk youth, and the positive changes coming to their neighborhood. For the first time since this ordeal began, the future looked bright. Mike's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number as he prepared to leave the hospital. Check your email. Your young friend has something to tell you. The attached video file made his blood run cold. Danny Morales sat tied to a chair, his face bruised and his eyes filled with terror as he stared directly into the camera. Chapter 16. Mike frantically called Agent Mills as he rushed from the hospital, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He tried the FBI field office emergency number, only to find the building locked and empty despite the late hour. Something was very wrong. His phone buzzed again with another video message, this one showing not just Danny, but Marcus Johnson, Luis Vasquez, and 3 other kids he'd helped rescue. All 6 teenagers were bound and gagged in what appeared to be the basement of the Knockout, their eyes wide with fear above makeshift gags. Vincent Marconi's voice came through clearly as he stepped into frame, his expensive suit immaculate despite the warehouse setting. Hello, Mr. Tyson. I hope you enjoyed your little investigation. The crime boss moved closer to the camera, his cold smile never wavering. Did you really think we didn't know about your federal friend? Patricia Mills sends her regards, by the way. Mike's stomach dropped as Agent Mills appeared in the video, no longer the professional law enforcement officer he'd trusted. She was laughing as she stood beside Vinny, her FBI credentials and service weapon clearly visible. The whole investigation was a setup, champ, Mills explained with casual cruelty. Every piece of evidence you gathered came straight to us. Every plan you made, Every move you considered. We knew about it before you did. Vinny took control of the narrative, his voice carrying the confident authority of a man who'd outmaneuvered a legend. Those arrest warrants you saw? Fake. The federal raids? Never happening. Your evidence? Already destroyed. The camera panned across the terrified faces of the kidnapped teenagers, each one a kid Mike had tried to save from this exact situation. Danny's eyes found the lens, and Mike could see the boy mouthing, "I'm sorry," despite his gag. "But I'm not." Unreasonable, Vinny continued. "You want to save these kids? I'll give you one chance. Tomorrow night, you fight in my ring against a real opponent. Carl, the butcher Kozlov. That's Carl Jr.'s daddy, and he's never lost a fight." Mills added details with professional efficiency. The match will be broadcast to high-stakes gamblers worldwide via encrypted stream. Pay-per-view for the ultra-wealthy who want to watch a legend die. We're taking bets on whether you last 5 minutes. Kozlov himself appeared in the video, a massive man standing 6'8" and weighing at least 280 pounds. His body was covered in prison tattoos depicting his kills, and his dead eye showed no trace of humanity or mercy. "The rules are simple," Vinny explained. "You show up at the knockout tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. You fight the butcher until one of you can't continue. No gloves, no referee, no mercy. If you win, which you won't, the kids go free. If you lose, they die anyway. But at least you'll have provided some entertainment first." The video ended with a close-up of Vinny's face, his expression showing genuine anticipation for the violence to come. "Oh, and Mike, don't even think about calling for help. We own this city, remember? 24 hours, champ. Don't keep us waiting." Mike stared at his blank phone screen, realizing that everything he'd accomplished over the past 2 weeks had been an illusion. Vinny had been playing chess while Mike thought they were boxing, and now 6 innocent kids would pay the price for his naive faith in the system. He had 24 hours to prepare for what would almost certainly be his final fight, against an opponent designed to kill him on live television while the people he'd trusted watched and counted their money. The trap was perfect, and Mike was walking into it with his eyes wide open. Mike Tyson arrived at the knockout at exactly 10 o'clock, knowing he was walking into a death trap, but having no alternative. The nightclub's exterior had been transformed for the evening's special event. Luxury cars lined the street, while armed guards checked invitation lists and searched guests for recording devices. The building hummed with anticipation and barely contained greed. High-stakes gamblers from around the world had paid $10,000 each for the privilege of watching a legend's destruction in person, while millions more would view the encrypted stream from private locations across the globe. Inside, the basement had been converted into a professional-grade arena that bore no resemblance to the makeshift fighting pit Mike had seen before. Professional lighting rigs illuminated a regulation-sized ring surrounded by tiered seating for 200 spectators. Multiple camera angles captured every detail for the worldwide broadcast that Mike's heart clenched when he spotted the suspended cage containing Danny and the other rescued kids. The metal prison hung 15 feet above the ring, its occupants clearly visible to the bloodthirsty crowd below. Danny's eyes found Mike's through the bars, and the teenager mouthed, "I'm sorry," despite his obvious terror. Rosa Morales sat bound and gagged in the front row, flanked by armed guards who made no effort to hide their weapons. Vinny had assembled every piece of leverage he needed to ensure Mike's compliance with this macabre theater. Vincent Marconi took the microphone wearing a white tuxedo that made him look like a perverted carnival ringmaster. His voice carried across the arena with practiced showmanship as he addressed the international audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Fall of a Legend, an exclusive presentation of justice, Newark style." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their excitement feeding on the promise of witnessing genuine violence broadcast to their private screens. Bets were being placed via encrypted apps, with odds heavily favoring Mike's destruction. In the red corner, Vinny continued with theatrical flair, weighing 190 pounds and fighting for his life. The former heavyweight champion of the world, Iron Mike Tyson. Mike entered the ring to a mixture of cheers and jeers, his simple black shorts and taped hands looking almost quaint compared to the high-tech production surrounding him. At 57, he moved with the careful precision of someone who understood his physical limitations. And in the blue corner, weighing 280 pounds of pure Russian violence. Karl the Butcher Kozlov. The man who emerged from the opposite corner barely looked human, standing 6'8" with the build of a heavyweight bodybuilder. Kozlov's entire torso was covered in prison tattoos depicting skulls, weapons, and body counts. His dead eyes showed no trace of conscience or mercy as he stared at Mike with predatory hunger. The basement fell silent except for the whisper of expensive silk and the soft electronic chiming of betting applications. Mike looked up once more at the terrified kids, then focused entirely on the monster approaching him. There would be no rules, no referee, and no mercy. Only survival. The opening bell rang like a death knell through the basement arena, and Karl the Butcher Kozlov charged across the ring with the fury of a caged animal finally released. His massive frame moved with surprising speed, closing the distance before Mike could fully establish his stance. The first punch, a sledgehammer right hand, caught Mike high on the forehead, snapping his head back and sending stars across his vision. Kozlov followed immediately with a left hook to the ribs that lifted Mike off his feet and drove the air from his lungs in a painful gasp. This wasn't boxing. This was controlled savagery designed to inflict maximum damage without regard for sport or fairness. Kozlov fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who'd learned violence as a survival skill in the worst prisons on earth. An elbow strike opened a cut above Mike's left eye, blood streaming down his face as the crowd roared approval. Kozlov used his reach advantage ruthlessly, keeping Mike at distance while landing devastating combinations that would have dropped a lesser man immediately. Tommy Russo, Vinny's hand-picked referee, allowed everything. Headbutts, elbows, kicks to the legs. Any technique that promised to hasten Mike's destruction was perfectly legal in this arena. The crowd screamed for blood while Vinny counted his money, confident that age and physics had finally caught up. With Iron Mike, a vicious uppercut snapped Mike's head back and loosened his legs. He staggered against the ropes, his 57-year-old body absorbing punishment that would have hospitalized men half his age. Kozlov sensed victory and pressed his attack, throwing bombs with both hands while Mike covered up desperately. The left side of Mike's face began to swell, closing his eye and making depth perception nearly impossible. Blood flowed freely from cuts above both eyes, creating a crimson mask that made him look like a wounded gladiator in this modern coliseum. For 10 brutal minutes, it appeared that Mike Tyson was being systematically destroyed by a younger, larger, more vicious opponent who felt no remorse about ending a legend's life on live television. The international gambling audience placed side bets on when exactly Mike would fall and whether he'd leave the ring alive. Kozlov landed a particularly devastating combination that sent Mike reeling across the ring, his legs unsteady and his guard dropping dangerously low. The Russian stalked forward with predatory confidence, raising his arms in premature victory as the crowd anticipated the finishing blow. Mike dropped to one knee, appearing to be on the verge of collapse as Kozlov approached for what seemed certain to be the final assault. The basement erupted in cheers and the electronic chiming of successful bets being collected, but something in Mike's eyes, a calculating intelligence that the punishment hadn't dimmed, suggested that reports of his destruction might be premature. Even bloodied and battered, Iron Mike Tyson remained one of the most dangerous men who'd ever stepped into a ring. The real fight was about to begin. Mike rose from his knee as Karl Kozlov approached for the kill, but something fundamental had shifted in his movement. The desperate, defensive fighter who'd been absorbing punishment suddenly moved with the fluid precision that had once terrorized heavyweight boxing. Drawing on muscle memory that ran deeper than conscious thought, Mike began to fight like the legend he'd once been. His head movement became minimal but perfect, slipping Kozlov's massive punches by mere inches while positioning himself for devastating counters. The spiritual lessons Cus D'Amato had taught him decades ago flooded back. The understanding that boxing was chess played at the speed of violence, that superior technique could overcome brute force. That true power came from perfect timing rather than raw strength. Kozlov threw a wild overhand right that would have ended the fight if it had connected, but Mike slipped it with the grace of a dancer and responded with a lightning-fast left hook to the Russian's liver. The punch landed with surgical precision, and for the first time in the fight, Kozlov's confident expression flickered with doubt. Mike's legendary hand speed returned as if the years had never passed. A feint with his left shoulder dropped Kozlov's guard for a split second, and Mike's right cross found the gap with devastating accuracy. The punch snapped the bigger man's head back and sent him staggering across the ring. The crowd's bloodthirsty roar began to fade into stunned silence as they witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. A 57-year-old man was systematically dismantling a monster who'd never lost a fight. Using nothing but superior technique and decades of hard-earned wisdom, Kozlov charged forward desperately, trying to overwhelm Mike with pure aggression. But Iron Mike was in a zone that transcended physical limitations. Every punch Kozlov threw was anticipated, every movement telegraphed, and countered with precision that bordered on supernatural. The thunderous uppercut lifted Kozlov off his feet and sent him crashing to the canvas. He rose on unsteady legs, his dead eyes now showing something they'd never contained before: fear. Mike pressed his advantage with the cold efficiency of a master craftsman. Each punch was placed with surgical accuracy, targeting specific points that would cause maximum damage, while conserving his own energy. This wasn't the wild brawling that had characterized the fight's opening minutes. This was pure boxing artistry. Another devastating combination dropped Kozlov to his knees. The massive Russian tried to rise but collapsed again, his body finally admitting what his mind refused to accept. He was overmatched by a man old enough to be his father. Mike stood over his unconscious opponent, bloodied but victorious, as the basement fell into shocked silence. The international gambling audience stared at their screens in disbelief, watching a legend prove that true greatness never truly fades. But as Mike turned toward the suspended cage containing the terrorized kids, Vincent Marconi's voice cut through the stunned quiet like a blade. "Magnificent performance, champ. Truly magnificent." Vinny's smile was cold and cruel as he approached the ring with a microphone in one hand and a pistol in the other. "But did you really think I was going to honor our deal?" Vinny Marconi stepped into the ring with the casual confidence of a man who held all the cards, his white tuxedo unstained despite the violence that had just concluded at his feet. The pistol in his hand gleamed under the professional lighting as he addressed both Mike and the international audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, the fight was merely tonight's opening entertainment," Vinny announced with theatrical flair. "The real business begins now." Armed men emerged from the shadows surrounding the arena, their weapons trained on Mike, while corrupt police officers, Martinez, Davis, and Thompson among them, positioned themselves at every exit. The basement had become a fortress with no escape routes. "You see, Mike, I never intended to let those kids live," Vinny continued, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather. "They've seen too much, know too many details about my operation. Loose ends are bad for business." Agent Patricia Mills appeared beside Vinny, no longer bothering to maintain her federal law enforcement facade. Her FBI credentials and service weapon were displayed prominently as she supervised the execution squad preparing to eliminate the witnesses. "Your death will be ruled self-defense," Mills explained with professional efficiency. A washed-up boxer attacked law enforcement officers during a legitimate investigation. "The kids will simply disappear," another tragic example of urban youth falling through society's cracks. But as Vinny raised his pistol toward the suspended cage, the basement's lights suddenly cut out, plunging the arena into complete darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on seconds later, revealing that the building was now surrounded by legitimate law enforcement officers wearing tactical gear. "Newark Police, FBI, building is surrounded." Detective Frank Romano's voice boomed through a megaphone from outside. "This is your only warning. Surrender immediately." The audience of wealthy criminals found themselves trapped as federal agents stormed the building through multiple entrances. What they'd thought was a private execution had become a carefully orchestrated sting operation. That Mike's apparent recklessness over the past weeks had actually been part of an elaborate plan coordinated with Detective Romano, one of the few honest cops in Newark's police department. While Vinny thought he was manipulating Mike through Agent Mills, the real investigation had been proceeding through parallel channels. Rosa Morales, despite appearing to be a helpless hostage, had been wearing a wire that recorded every confession and admission of guilt. The international gambling audience had unknowingly provided evidence of their own criminal activity through their participation in the illegal broadcast. You think you're smart? Vinny snarled, his composure finally cracking as the trap closed. Around him, I own this city. I own these people. But as gunfire erupted throughout the building between Vinny's men and the legitimate law enforcement officers, Mike realized that the most dangerous part of the evening was just beginning. 6 terrified kids still hung in a cage above the chaos, and Vinny's desperation was about to make him even more dangerous. The real fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Gunfire erupted throughout the knockout as federal agents battled Vinny's corrupt network in a war zone that had moments before been an arena for wealthy entertainment. Mike dove for cover as bullets shattered the professional lighting rigs, plunging sections of the basement into chaotic darkness. The suspended cage containing the kids swayed dangerously as ricochets pinged off its metal bars. Danny and the others huddled together in terror while the battle raged beneath them, their prison becoming a death trap if the supporting cables were severed by stray gunfire. Mike fought his way through Vinny's remaining enforcers using the close-quarters combat skills that boxing had taught him. Fat Tony Benedetto tried to block his path with a baseball bat, but Mike's left hook caught him flush on the jaw, dropping the massive man like a stone. Rick Santoro came at him with a knife, the corrupt trainer's face twisted with desperation as he realized his criminal empire was collapsing. Mike caught his wrist, twisted sharply, and delivered an uppercut that sent Santoro crashing into an overturned table. Tommy Volpe lasted longer, his experience as a street fighter serving him well in the chaotic environment. But Mike's superior technique eventually prevailed, a perfectly timed right cross ending Volpe's resistance and clearing the path to the cage controls. Through the smoke and confusion, Mike spotted Brad Kellerman near the mechanical system that operated the suspended prison. The trainer who'd started this whole ordeal with his disrespect at Riverside Gym was fumbling with a set of keys, his face showing genuine remorse for the first time. "Mike," Brad shouted over the gunfire. "The release mechanism, I can lower the cage." For a moment, it seemed like Brad was choosing redemption over self-preservation, finally doing the right thing after weeks of serving evil. He inserted the key into the control panel and began turning it, the cage slowly descending towards safety. But Vinny Marconi appeared behind Brad with his pistol drawn, his white tuxedo now stained with smoke and debris. The crime boss's face showed the desperate fury of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. "Nobody leaves," Vinny screamed, pulling the trigger. The bullet caught Brad in the back, spinning him around as he collapsed against the control panel. With his dying breath, the trainer pressed the keys into Mike's hand, blood staining the metal as his body went limp. Mentorship for at-risk youth. 37 kids who might have fallen into Vinny's trap now had legitimate opportunities to build successful lives. Danny Morales shadowboxed in the corner, preparing for his first sanctioned amateur boxing match, scheduled for that evening. At 17, he'd grown 2 inches and gained 15 pounds of muscle under proper training and nutrition. More importantly, he'd gained the confidence that came from knowing his skills were his own, earned through honest effort rather than exploitation. "Remember," Mike told Danny as they worked on technique, "boxing isn't about hurting people. It's about discipline, respect, and protecting yourself and others. Tonight, you fight clean and you fight smart." The match that evening was everything. Underground fighting wasn't, supervised by licensed officials, conducted with proper safety equipment, and judged on skill rather than brutality. Danny won on points, his superior technique overcoming an opponent who'd relied on aggression over intelligence that in the crowd. Mike watched with quiet satisfaction as Danny raised his arms in victory, not the desperate celebration of someone who'd survived a blood sport, but the earned pride of an athlete who'd competed fairly and succeeded through preparation and heart. That a young trainer named Billy Martinez, nephew of the corrupt officer who'd been arrested during the raids, approached Mike respectfully after the fight. The 25-year-old had grown up in the neighborhood and understood both its problems and its potential. "Mr. Tyson, could you teach me how to work with troubled kids? I want to help prevent what almost happened to my cousin and his friends." Mike smiled and nodded, recognizing the earnest desire to make a difference. "Come in tomorrow morning. We'll start with the basics: respect, patience, and understanding that real strength protects others. As the crowd dispersed and the gym emptied, Mike remained behind to turn off the lights and lock up. The sign above the door read D'Amato's Dream, where legends begin, but Mike knew the real legend wasn't what happened in the ring. It was what happened in the lives transformed outside of it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new kids who needed guidance, and new opportunities to prove that true champions were measured not by the opponents they defeated, but by the lives they elevated. The greatest victories weren't won with fists, they were won with heart. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel. Tell them, I tried to make it right, Brad whispered, his eyes losing focus as life faded from his body. Mike pocketed the keys and continued fighting toward the cage, knowing that 6 innocent lives depended on his ability to navigate this urban battlefield. Detective Romano's voice echoed through the chaos, coordinating the legitimate law enforcement response that was systematically dismantling Vinny's corrupt network. But the most dangerous part of the evening was yet to come. Vincent Marconi backed toward the building's rear exit with Rosa Morales held at gunpoint, using Danny's grandmother as his final insurance policy while sirens wailed outside, and his criminal empire collapsed around him. The basement had become a war zone of overturned tables and broken glass, littered with the unconscious forms of his defeated enforcers. Safe passage, Vinny shouted to the federal agents positioned throughout the building. I walk out of here with the old lady, or she dies right here. Detective Frank Romano's voice crackled over the tactical radio, coordinating with federal agents to maintain distance and avoid escalating the hostage situation. The honest cop had waited years for this moment, but he wouldn't risk an innocent life to capture Vinny. Mike approached slowly with his hands visible, his bloodied face showing calm determination despite the weapon pointed at Rosa's head. The elderly woman met his eyes with surprising composure, her decades of community activism having prepared her for confrontations with dangerous men. It doesn't have to end this way, Vinny, Mike said quietly, stepping carefully over debris, while closing the distance by inches. You're smart, you're organized. You could build something legitimate instead of destroying kids' lives. Vinny's laugh was bitter and desperate. Legitimate? You think there's anything legitimate left in this world? I built an empire by understanding what people really want. Violence, power, the chance to watch someone else suffer. But Mike continued speaking with the calm authority of someone who'd faced his own demons and emerged stronger. He talked about his own troubled past, his mistakes, his journey through violence and addiction towards something resembling peace. I've been where you are, Mike said, his voice carrying genuine empathy. Angry at the world, convinced that power was the only thing that mattered. But there's always a choice to be something better. For a moment, Vinny's grip on Rosa loosened slightly as Mike's words seemed to reach some buried part of his humanity. Tears appeared in the crime boss's eyes as he remembered dreams from before violence became his primary language. I wanted to be a teacher once, Vinny whispered, his voice breaking. Before my father's business consumed everything. Before I learned that kindness was weakness and mercy was stupidity. Mike nodded encouragingly, still moving closer with glacial patience. It's never too late to choose a different path. These kids you've been hurting, they could be students you help instead of victims you exploit. The gun wavered in Vinny's hand as decades of suppressed conscience battled against ingrained brutality. Rosa remained perfectly still, understanding that her survival depended on Mike's ability to reach whatever humanity remained in her captor. But the moment of potential redemption passed like a shadow. Vinny's face hardened again as greed and fear reasserted control over whatever brief glimpse of decency had appeared. No, he snarled, raising the pistol with renewed determination. I'd rather die rich than live poor. I'd rather be feared than pitied. His finger tightened on the trigger, but that moment of emotional vulnerability had given Mike exactly what he needed. One split second, when Vinny's attention was divided between his weapon and his conflicted conscience, Mike lunged forward in. The instant when Vinny's guard dropped, his movement faster than anyone expected from a man who'd just survived the most brutal fight of his life. The crime boss's eyes widened in shock as Iron Mike closed the distance with the explosive power that had once terrorized heavyweight boxing. The single punch was perfectly placed, a surgical uppercut that caught Vinny flush on the chin with just enough force to render him unconscious without causing permanent damage. The pistol flew from his hand as he crumpled to the concrete floor, his white tuxedo finally stained with the dust and debris of his collapsed empire. Rosa Morales stepped away from her fallen captor with dignity intact, her weathered hands smoothing her dress as federal agents secured the scene. The basement that had moments before echoed with gunfire and violence now filled with the professional efficiency of law enforcement processing the largest organized crime bust in Newark's recent history. Detective Frank Romano approached with handcuffs, his weathered face showing satisfaction at finally bringing justice to a man who'd corrupted his city for too long. Around them, corrupt officers Martinez, Davis, and Thompson were being led away in shackles while Agent Patricia Mills sat in stunned silence, her federal career destroyed by her association with Vinny's criminal network. "It's over," Romano announced, his voice carrying across the basement as the last of Vinny's men surrendered to legitimate authority. "The whole network is finished." Mike used Brad Kellerman's keys to lower the suspended cage, freeing Danny and the other 5 teenagers who'd been trapped above the chaos. The kids emerged shaken but unharmed, their relief obvious as they realized their nightmare was finally ending. The scope of the criminal network's collapse was staggering. 15 corrupt police officers were arrested, 3 city officials were indicted, and a web of criminal activity spanning 5 states had been dismantled in a single coordinated operation. Evidence collected during the raid would put dozens of criminals behind bars for decades. Danny rushed to embrace his grandmother, both of them crying with relief as they held each other tight. Marcus Johnson, Luis Vasquez, and the other rescued kids gathered around Mike, their faces showing gratitude mixed with amazement that someone had actually fought for them when the system had failed. The international gambling audience that had paid to watch Mike's destruction instead witnessed the complete destruction of Vincent Marconi's criminal empire. Their encrypted payments provided additional evidence of illegal activity that would lead to arrests across 3 continents. Paramedics treated Mike's injuries while he gave his statement to federal investigators. The cuts above his eyes would heal, the bruises would fade, but the satisfaction of protecting innocent children would last forever. A.S. Vinny Marconi was loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard. Mike felt a profound sense of completion. The legend had proven that true strength came from protecting others, not destroying enemies. Justice had been served, and Newark's children could sleep safely for the first time in years. 3 months later, Mike Tyson stood in the renovated gym that had once been Sal Torino's Riverside Community Center, now renamed D'Amato's Dream, in honor of the man who'd taught him that boxing was about building character, not just breaking opponents. The walls displayed a mixture of boxing history and community hope, photographs of legendary fighters alongside images of local kids who'd found better paths through the programs Mike had established. Where Brad Kellerman had once terrorized young fighters, certified trainers now provided patient instruction focused on discipline, respect, and personal growth. Sal Torino, recovered from his heart attack and serving as head trainer, worked with a group of elderly community members who discovered that age was no barrier to staying active and strong. His weathered hands still wrapped fighters' hands with the precision of decades of experience, but now every lesson emphasized protection over destruction. The Second Chance Foundation, established with Mike's money and managed by Rosa Morales as community outreach coordinator, provided scholarships, educational programs, and Sal Torino, recovered from his heart attack and serving as head trainer, worked with a group of elderly community members who discovered that age was no barrier to staying active and strong. His weathered hands still wrapped fighters' hands with the precision of decades of experience, but now every lesson emphasized protection over destruction. The Second Chance Foundation, established with Mike's money and managed by Rosa Morales as community outreach coordinator, provided scholarships, educational programs, and mentorship for at-risk youth. 37 kids who might have fallen into Vinny's trap now had legitimate opportunities to build successful lives. Danny Morales shadowboxed in the corner, preparing for his first sanctioned amateur boxing match scheduled for that evening. At 17, he'd grown 2 inches and gained 15 pounds of muscle under proper training and nutrition. More importantly, he'd gained the confidence that came from knowing his skills were his own, earned through honest effort rather than exploitation. Remember, Mike told Danny as they worked on technique. Boxing isn't about hurting people. It's about discipline, respect, and protecting yourself and others. Tonight, you fight clean and you fight smart. The match that evening was everything. Underground fighting wasn't. Supervised by licensed officials, conducted with proper safety equipment, and judged on skill rather than brutality. Danny won on points. His superior technique overcoming an opponent who'd relied on aggression over intelligence that in the crowd. Mike watched with quiet satisfaction as Danny raised his arms in victory. Not the desperate celebration of someone who'd survived a blood sport, but the earned pride of an athlete who'd competed fairly and succeeded through preparation and heart. That a young trainer named Billy Martinez, nephew of the corrupt officer who'd been arrested during the raids, approached Mike respectfully after the fight. The 25-year-old had grown up in the neighborhood and understood both its problems and its potential. "Mr. Tyson, could you teach me how to work with troubled kids? I want to help prevent what almost happened to my cousin and his friends." Mike smiled and nodded, recognizing the earnest desire to make a difference. "Come in tomorrow morning. We'll start with the basics: respect, patience, and understanding that real strength protects others." As the crowd dispersed and the gym emptied, Mike remained behind to turn off the lights and lock up. The sign above the door read D'Amato's Dream, where legends begin. But Mike knew the real legend wasn't what happened in the ring. It was what happened in the lives transformed outside of it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new kids who needed guidance, and new opportunities to prove that true champions were measured not by the opponents they defeated, but by the lives they elevated. The greatest victories weren't won with fists. They were won with heart. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the